Good evening. Welcome to this 2020 Prisoners Week Forum number 3, Support Outside Prisons. Please note this event is being recorded and may be made available for public viewing online at some point in the future. My name is Pete White and I am in the privileged position of being the chair for this evening's event. Each of the 3 speakers who I will introduce to you shortly will each speak for about 5 minutes. There will then be a Q&A session after the individual presentations. If you wish to raise a question as the presentations are going along, please use the chat facility at the bottom of the screen. If you would like to be given the opportunity to ask your question live on camera, please make this clear in your text. When the time comes, your camera and microphone will be opened up by us. Immediately after the Q&A, there will be a short poll on the screen, which will take maybe a minute. Sorry, there will be a Q&A session. There will be a short poll after Rob Strachan's presentation, and then at the end there will be an evaluation form to fill in. So we'll go in just a minute. So to introduce myself more properly, I've been involved in the Scottish justice system on and off for the last 15 years. I've had the pleasure and privilege of working in every Scottish prison and meeting all sorts of interesting people, some of whom wear uniforms and are managers in the system, as well as people serving sentences. So up until 2 years ago, I was looking after and running Positive Prison, Positive Futures, a campaigning organisation representing people with convictions in national events and in Parliament in Scotland. So without further ado, please let me introduce the first of our 3 speakers. This is Rob Strachan. Rob has been Head of Strategy and Improvement for the Scottish Prison Service since 2015. He is responsible for prison strategy, prison strategic planning, prisons research and evidence, and partnership working. Prior to joining the SPS, Rob was Chief Officer of the Lothian and Borders Community Justice Authority, having spent 11 years in the Home Office and 11 years in local government before then. So, over to you, Rob.
Thanks very much, Pete. I'm delighted to be here tonight alongside yourself, Paul and Kevin, and the people in the audience. I look forward to this discussion. I know I've got 5 minutes to get through this, so I'll make it short and sweet, really. I think our starting point is very much that SPS should be and is a relational public service. And I think Through Care goes to the very heart of that. There are probably 5 things that we know work on Through Care, although I'm happy to hear of even more. But I think the prevention focus of Through Care, good data sharing with partners, facilitating access, preventing homelessness, preventing reoffending, access to health and welfare. Good coordination, preventing people bounced around services in an uncoordinated way when they leave custody. A recognition of the intensity of support that's needed, especially at the highest risk period in the first 72 hours. And then there's something about stickability for me, where you have support for the most vulnerable, access and mentoring and peer support, principally by people who are not arms of the state, principally by people in the third sector in particular. And then the 5th element of that for me is kindness, which I think is going to be a consistent theme tonight, about the need for kindness and empathy in the way that relational role is delivered and in the way that services are designed and delivered more broadly. COVID's brought into sharp focus really the role of prisons in Through Care, and it's something that we'll be running a poll on after my slot here. And we've conducted a process evaluation of Through Care based on early release, and I don't want to preempt that process evaluation, but I was heavily involved at the time, and there were some learning points for me. One was that Through Care is a partnership response. It's not something that can be delivered by any one agency or one sector. So it's a partnership response based on good data, good communications between partners and sectors. It's also about recognising that the role of SPS needs, and the way that SPS meets its community justice obligations has to be in a way that complements the role of the third sector and other community partners rather than duplicates, particularly the distinctive role of the third sector, which is really important for me to promote. And I think it's also important for me to say that at this moment in time, it's unlikely that SPS would be able to resume any through care support service while the population remains so complex and also at a time of managing a pandemic. But nevertheless, we do recognise that we've got obligations as a community justice partner, not just in terms of statute and regulatory obligations, but also as a partner, an active partner to achieve community justice outcomes. Now, just very quickly, the way that we do that, the way that we make a high impact contribution to through care is very much in 6 key ways, really. Good facilitation of services, good facilitation of access, including digital access, which we want to move to, for people in and leaving our care by local services in support of their reintegration. We know of a distance to travel on that. Good release management for people in and leaving our care, and we know that there are challenges around that good release management and how we move to that. Working on, building on the good things that are already in place. Good work with the public social partnerships to ensure that people access through care support well before the release date. Good data sharing arrangements with local community justice partnerships so that addiction services, housing, social work know when someone from their area is going to be released and is scheduled to be released back to their area in 12 weeks' time. That gives them time to gear up services and apply for flexible release, all that, in support of their reintegration. Good homelessness prevention through implementing the SHORE standards, which is shared standards between prisons and housing, and good access to welfare through joint working with Job Centre Plus. So all of those strands are really important, but I think it's really important that I hear from you tonight about what you think our role is in through care, so we can reflect on that going forward. We've put up 2 options, but we know that there might be more, and we're quite keen to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you. You'll see there that the question is, what role should Scotland's prison system play in through care? Option A, prisons should support and facilitate through care, mainly pre-release, promoting through care, facilitating access, sharing data with partners to prevent homelessness and enable access to services. Or option B, prisons should do that, plus actually deliver through care support in the community for a limited period of time. Thank you.
In addition to these 2 options, if you have any views in addition to those 2, please enter them in the chat function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get into things later on. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. Are we all done with the polling there?
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. Next up is Paul Stevenson, Director of Homelessness Prevention at Bethany Christian Trust. After working for more than a decade in homelessness accommodation and addiction recovery centres in Scotland, India and Nepal, Paul turned his focus upstream to homelessness prevention 3.5 years ago, having first started working for Bethany back in 2006. One of the services for which Paul is ultimately responsible is Connect to Community. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Pete, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to take part in tonight's discussion. Bethany Christian Trust was started in the early 1980s as a response to homelessness in Edinburgh. And since then, our work has diversified, and 7 years ago, we started caring for ex-offenders, which is now known as Connect to Community, or C2C for short. Over the last 7 years, Dave McAdam, Gillian Faulkner, and Mari Phillipson have worked with 312 prison leavers, with the majority of all referrals coming through from chaplaincy teams. Over the first 3 months of lockdown, Connect to Community carried out 20 gate releases. This involves a staff member or volunteer mentor picking up a person from prison on their day of release and driving them to where they need to go to get the support that they need, whether that be social workers, housing officers, to register with doctors and to register for benefits. This is essential work that extends beyond these initial hours of liberation. In fact, it's the nature of the ongoing support to men and women that results in 80% of those we work with desisting from crime during their first 12 months of release. Now, let me make that clear. That's not because we work with what some may consider the low-hanging fruit. For example, in the last 7 years, C2C have worked with 60 registered sex offenders. 3 have returned to prison due to technical breaches, and only 1 has reoffended. Through care can be and should be for all. As well as C2C, Bethany also run the Rapid Reaccommodation Welcome Centre in Edinburgh, formerly known as the Care Shelter. It is the last resort for people rough sleeping on the streets of the city. Over recent years, on average, throughout a season, 3 people every fortnight accessing the service said that their most recent accommodation was prison. That's 3 people every fortnight being released into rough sleeping in Edinburgh alone, and not even temporary accommodation such as a B&B or a hostel. Across the first 6 weeks of this year's season, that trend sadly remains the same. It is evident that not everyone has a personal housing plan on release from prison that joins the dots in the system and connects people from the day of liberation into secure and safe accommodation. Whether it be temporary or permanent, it continues to remain the case that 1 in 3 people are liberated from prison but released into homelessness. It's because of stats like this that Bethany have a place working with people as they transition through prison and back into society. And we can only do this thanks to our network of volunteer mentors. So over the lifetime of the project, these 7 years that C2C has been running, 172 people have worked with a mentor that's been allocated to them by C2C. Now, mentoring is meaningful when it's done with genuine kindness that actively and flexibly responds to the needs of others. Our mentors defend the vulnerable, build them up, never give up, and help people endure through every circumstance. This is what is needed, and it starts in prison and has no set point of termination. The first 72 hours are the hardest, but so many people we continue to support have been out of prison for a year or more as they process a lifetime of trauma. Housing is sometimes something that we can provide and always something that we can support people with. We also offer employment opportunities with landscaping, catering opportunities. However, 53% of all our referrals report issues with addiction and mental health. And as a result of that, we've managed to refer about 28 people to rehab. It's important to note, though, that this type of effective through care does not begin at the prison gate on release, but it should exist on entry to prison in the first place. And in actual fact, some of the most beneficial through care that we've been involved in has been done with people in Glen Oakle and Shotts. because their chaplaincy team gives us much earlier referrals than some other prisons. Also because our workers, David and Jill, can go regularly to speak at church services where they have the opportunity to sit down and chat to prisoners. And over time, trust can be built and assurance is made that we can be trusted. And as a result of that, we can then bring our mentees into the prison as well, which we've been able to do in HMP Addywell. If you'd like to be a mentor, then more information is available on our website. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion that follows. Oh.
Thank you very much, Paul. Right. Third, but by no means least, is Kevin Neary, co-founder of Aid and Abet, advocates for highlighting awareness about trauma, addiction, criminal justice and recovery, building trust, positive relationships and supporting people to engage with services from a prison gate to services. So over to you, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. Thanks for chairing the meeting tonight, Pete, and thanks, Rob and Paul, for your inputs tonight. And it's very good for thought, thinking, and thanks everybody for attending. It's a great opportunity for me to speak tonight, and hopefully get questions as well. Aid and Abet was to prevent the revolving door to people going back to prison. Aid and Abet was put together by lived experience, and I'm using that term, guys who have been in the criminal justice system, have been part of the revolving door most of their lives in recovery for addiction. And it was that part of doing the gate pickup, initially getting agents' visits within the prison to build that relationship, because the relationships are vital, and to build trust that we can offer a helping hand and to stand by guys and girls' sides as they come out the prison gate, to reduce the stress when you transition through a prison system where all your needs are met within prison, and you're coming into society where your needs are not met as much because you need to start claiming benefit. You've got a house and you've got to survive and live, but all they needs are met in prison. And again, to also help build relationships. So our job is we are just bridges into services to that trust and building thing, that we walk people to the door to services. Sometimes we may walk in. The whole part of it is about trusting in within the service, trusting working alongside guys, staying by their sides, building esteem and confidence that they can move on their journey on their own one day. And that's happened. It's been very successful. Over the years, working within the services, my experience in the last 7 years is, with my own experience and the work I've been doing, I then recognised that how much trauma happened in my life, and various people that I work alongside, everything went back to childhood. Everything went back to that time in their life. I talk about the day that if you had to get 100 residents within a prison and ask them to step forward if any of them had experienced domestic violence, step forward if any had experienced physical, mental, sexual abuse, step forward if you've been in the care system, step forward if a member of your family was in prison, step forward if any one of your members of the family had mental health, and you would see everyone stepping forward. So, our passion and what mine is today that we spoke earlier with Rob is we talk about intervention and prevention, my line of work today is focusing on early intervention and prevention, preventing young people going into the criminal justice system, as well as Aid and Abet mentors are out at prisons and picking guys up from the gate, and doing that. We also want to focus on preventing young people getting there. Aid and Abet has now, went into different areas such as Glasgow and the POP project, Action for Children and a project that's happening there, supporting young people. So mentors have been spread out all over. I work alongside police today to support them and help them, to break down barriers and build relationships, and again, to get into services. I also believe that when walking through prison and you go through into the system, a prison system, that there should be a level of therapy offered to people when they're going through the sentence to get that deep-rooted issue to why the offending started. And usually through that, you'll find that most, if not all, guys who are in prison today experience some form of trauma as children, you know, and it's getting to the root. So how do we prevent the revolving door? Because it doesn't just happen with picking somebody up for the gate and then getting them into services. How can they deal with looking at what happened in their past, and how can they build trust to deal with other services out there? You know, through care, I've been involved in through care, working alongside the guys at Parliament when it was happening. It was powerful what was happening out there. I seen the poll there where it should, prison be working into the community for a limited time? You know, I certainly believe that they should. And all this work, and what Robbie spoke about tonight, and what Paul spoke about tonight, it's the same. It's when you're giving yourself freely to someone, volunteering in whatever capacity or in your professional field, that is kindness. That is kindness in all forms. When you're there to listen, it's kindness. When you're there to be by somebody's side, it's kindness. You know, and through that, you build a relationship. Some people went alongside, every relationship was broken. Again, they build a relationship with me or the mentors that aid and abet, and then they can build on that. You know, they can get growth out of that. So what we aim to do with aid and abet is about using lived experience, you know, in any form of you don't need to be in the criminal justice system or be in addiction to have lived experience. Everybody has lived experience. Everybody's got something to give. And it's that part of joining up the dots, pulling organisations together, all working collectively, you know, no duplicating, but we've all got something special to give, you know. But what runs through every service, every mentor, every organisation, for where Paul is and for where Rob is, you know, is that kindness, because we care about people. It's that form of compassion, you know, compassion's in every single one of us. And it's that. So how do we prevent the revolving door? Is to support people in prisons where they can get proper therapy for what trauma's happened in their lives. How do we feed that into prisons? And then build guys up for true care to come back out. Because when you transition with a psychic change, the psychic change is a change in your thinking, a change in your behaviour. And if you've got that, you need the tools and you need the apprenticeship. And you need apprenticeships with people who have already done it. And it's building in hope. And when you give somebody hope that the future's there, you know, that you can have a future, you can have a life, you can turn your life at any time and move forward. And we demonstrate that at Aid and Abet. We demonstrate that. Action speaks louder than words, as I always say. You know, sounds a bit of a cliche, but you know, when you put action in and you see people change, and it might be the most simplest change, a relationship building with mum and dad again, or their partners, or their sons and daughters, you know, that's what it is. But I need to emphasise on the fact that I believe that 99% of the prison population all over, not just in Scotland, but all over, these guys have experienced some form of trauma or adversity at childhood. We're trying to deal with it out here as they come to the prison gate, but how can we prevent it? How can we support the through care teams? How can we support Bethany? How can we all work together, you know, collectively? So, you know, these are my passions, and I think that conversation is about how do we bring change? How do we take risks? Because sometimes we all sit too comfortable and we don't take the risks, and I think risks are important to take for the right reasons, because within risks you get results, you know, because you're doing it for the right reason.
Okay, sorry, Kevin. I'm going to be a bossy chair here, and I think it's time we open this up for Q&A.
I've never seen your message. All right, cheers.
Okay, thank you. I like your excuse factory, Kevin. That's all good. Right, so we've got some questions that have come through, and one from, if you want to ask your thing on camera, your question on camera, please put a message up to the Prisoners Week label on the chat session. So we've got one question that came in with registration from Mark Gilmore. Can you walk us through the pathway to meaningful reintegration of a prisoner on release, including church support?
Yeah.
Paul, can you help us
yeah,
out,
sure,
please?
definitely. So I think it really helps to get the referrals early on from the chaplaincy team. So like I said, Glenacle and Shotts are a great example of that, really close working relationship with Dorothy Russell there. So she will hear of people who she knows are going to maybe be homeless on release, or maybe just are going to need additional support when they leave. And so we try as fast as we can to find out where they're going to be released to, and then off the back of that, find a mentor that lives in a close enough community and ideally situated alongside a church there as well, so that they're not just being supported by the mentor, but also by the church. And then also be able to kind of visit that individual in prison as well prior to their release a few times and build up trust. And in Addiewell, we can actually do that inside the chaplaincy room and not just in a visitor's kind of agency room. And that makes a difference to do it on someone else's, on the prisoner's turf. And then on the day of gate release, meeting that person in a car and then driving them to get the support that they need, but then just being very hands-on, you know, like keeping your mobile on to just be in communication with that person, especially within the first 72 hours, but then very, very regularly after that. And I think it's important that there isn't a termination time on that support lasts indefinitely, and plugging people into things in their community as well to help around housing, employment as well, and social support as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. The next question comes from Sheila Gordon from Crossreach, who I understand is willing to ask a question on camera. If we can get our technical wizardry to operate that, please. Is this happening?
I think so, yes. I
Good.
think so, yes. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Thank you very much. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. My question was to Rob, and when Crossreach we run 2 prison visitor centres, one in Perth and one in Pullman, and so we're only too well aware that across the country there are a number of inconsistencies in terms of resources and approaches to the whole through care process. And what can we do to make that more uniform, because it is a bit of a postcode lottery, isn't it, just now in the experience of through care?
Right then, Rob, I think that one lands on you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it is a particular challenge, because you're trying to strike the balance between the consistency that you would, you know, a national organisation like SPS, for example, would want consistency, right? It's easier for us to work with consistency. However, communities aren't consistent, and the model for community justice in Scotland, and I headed up a CJA before I joined SPS, which was the regional model for through care. And obviously there was an audit by Audit Scotland and others that suggested that a local model would be more effective, and that's, you know, that community justice reform's been in place now for, I think it was 2016 the legislation kicked in. And the inconsistency comes from the fact that it's about strong local partnerships, coordinating the reintegration of people back into the local area. So in some ways you're trying to, we are all partners are trying to reconcile the need for consistency and the delivery of through care, but also with the need to respect local democracy and the need for local communities to organise their services in a way that suits them. If I could just give you an example, I've got place leadership for the 3 island communities, 3 island authorities, I should say, and the way that Shetland, Orkney and Western Isles do through care is very different to maybe the way that Inverclyde or Edinburgh or Glasgow or something would be doing through care. Where I think we could get to is maybe a consistency in the way that through care is commissioned, and we have that through the public social partnerships, which puts the role of the third sector front and centre in terms of supporting people serving short sentences. You know, it basically puts the the role of the third sector front and centre in terms of reintegration of people leaving custody. One of the things that we can do to ensure some level of consistency is make sure that all councils in Scotland, all housing authorities, social work, health and so on, have access to the data about who is coming into custody and who is leaving custody, so that they can gear up services through the local partnerships to respond to that effectively. And that has to include the role of the third sector. So I know it might appear a bit messy from a national perspective, but that inconsistency, I think, comes with the fact that we have a local model which is about respecting local communities and the need for local communities to put partnership arrangements in place to support reintegration.
Okay, Rob, don't go away quite yet. We've got another question coming for you from Ian Smith, the Lawyer of the Year.
Yeah, I was smiling at his comment when he said he had a face for radio.
Absolutely. He wasn't commenting on you though, Rob, don't worry.
Yeah.
So his question is, do you think this prison service miss out on a more inclusive service by not employing lived experience mentors to guide people away from the justice system and to effectively engage with services?
Did you say employed there, Pete?
Employed, yeah. Why do you not employ them?
Yeah, I think we have challenges as a service in terms of how we make sure that the employment profile, if you like, of the prison service is consistent with the population of Scotland as a whole, really. And that would include people with a whole range of experiences and backgrounds. So I think it's, yeah, absolutely, it's something that we would want to do moving forward. The other thing that we can do, not just about employing people, but is also about facilitating access to the people in our care by third sector organisations in order to provide people with the support that they need through the gate and back into society. Now, we have to do that in a more coordinated way, I think. And that's a responsibility of not just SPS, but also third sector organisations, really, in terms of how we work together. I think we need to do that in a much more coordinated way. That's an effective way of getting, that's another effective way of getting people with lived experience engaging and supporting people through the system.
So can the SPS do something to better support the funding for third sector organisations that employ people with lived experience of punishment?
Can you say that again, Pete?
Can the SPS do anything to promote better funding for organisations, third sector organisations that employ people with convictions as mentors to do some of the work you're talking about?
I certainly think we can promote an approach. What we can't do, and I think one of the challenges I've had since I've come into the SPS is maybe a perception of what the SPS is as an organisation, what it can do, what it can't do. What the SPS is not is a funder of third sector services. The SPS is an executive agency of government, so SPS has allocated resources to deliver prison services. Any services that government wants to commission around through care and so on, it can do so, but it has to do it directly. We do not commission those services.
I hear
it's
you,
really
Rob.
important.
I hear you, Rob. Can you do something to promote better attention from the people who can support and provide funding to third sector organisations?
So, yeah, well, what we would do is if an organisation wants to apply to a funder, say Robertson Trust or Lottery Fund or something like that, we already have a partnership agreement in place which any third sector organisation wanting to do that can follow. What we wouldn't do is give preference, and this is one of the things I'm very passionate about, is transparency in our relationship with the third sector. So we will not meet or engage with individual third sector organisations, because if we want to meet with SACRO, we need to meet with 100 other ones, right? For example. So our engagement has to be done in a very strategic, transparent way with the third sector. That also applies to the way that third sector services are delivered in prisons. So a good example would be if, for example, picking Sacro again, if Sacro had an idea about delivering a certain service in a particular prison, we would not support Sacro to get that funding. What we could do is confirm with the funder that there is a demand for that service. What we won't do is promote individual third sector organisations, but we would confirm whether there's a demand for that particular service. And I'm pretty sure the third sector would agree with that approach, because it means that it's a very transparent relationship, and that's what it has to be.
Thanks very much, Rob. That's very helpful. And your clarity and transparency are very welcome as well. Thank you very much indeed. Right, and so from David and Ruth Martin in the Prison Fellowship, thank you, Paul, for you're so right in saying early engagement and no set end date for engagement. Do your mentors initially meet those due for release through the Prison Fellowship meetings or in some other settings? Okay, Paul?
Great, yeah. We're totally open to working in partnership with any organisations. Yep, generally we get invites from chaplaincy teams to go and speak in prisons. We've got partnership agreements with Court and Vale and other prisons as well to be able to do this. Yeah, being able to be there on a Sunday during a church service, but also to be there at other times. We've recently partnered with Junction 42, for example, and do like life skills programs with them as well. And yeah, in actual fact, our offices in Glasgow are in the same office building as Prison Fellowship as well. So yeah, we definitely do work together with them and look for whatever inroads we can have. But generally, we find that chaplaincy teams welcome us in. And just in answer to Sheena's question as well, we don't just work with Christians, we work with everyone. Just like chaplaincy teams work with everyone in all the prisons across Scotland.
Thank you, Paul. That's very helpful, very clear. Right, a question from Robbie Carroll to all the panel, but I'm going to start with you, Kevin. If you could change one or two things in prison, big changes, to support prisoners leaving, what would it be and why? Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, just because something's come up on my screen here. You know, the two things, well, first of all, as I spoke about earlier, is if people were given more tools to leave prison with a sense of hope, and as I say, it goes back to therapy. Is there more therapy that could be given to prepare people for leaving prison? You know, that they're not leaving with their scars for the past, as Smithy spoke about. So we put a wee comment up Ian Smith about telling about the scars and getting at the hole, because, you know, I just believe that if you've been in prison, you've got a lot of time for reflection. You're getting punished for your crime, but there's a part of rehabilitation which is so important for when coming out of prison. And to help guys and girls on their way is about how do they learn to deal with what's happened in their past. How can we give them that to help them deal with what's happened in the past? How can they move forward? But then recognising that, you know what, I'm going to engage with a service to deal with the loss of my parents or the loss of my child or whatever went through. You know, it's to deal with that, to give them that bit of belief. And I believe something like that in prison could help people move forward, because, you know, as I'll keep hitting on the fact it's a revolving door. You know, not everybody goes to prison just at once. You know, you're going back, especially to the YOs and through, and sure Rob will agree that in the prison system you see the same faces all the time coming in and out, and it's that. So how do we prevent that? And the core root goes back to that. How can we deal with what traumatic events happen to them? How can we give them some sort of tool, some sort of therapy support, extra support, and then building that relationship to come out to prison, to meet whoever mentors can be there to take them on their journey to recovery.
Thanks, Kevin. That's very helpful. Does anyone else want to contribute? Rob?
Pete, I didn't hear your question properly. I'm sorry. What was that?
If you could change one or two things in prison to support prisoners leaving, what would it be and why? Or have you said your piece already?
I would say housing. And the reason I would say housing, not just because I've got a housing background, but also unless you have an address, unless you have somewhere to go, it makes accessing other services in the community very difficult. And one of the things that's been really important, I think, the last few years is that housing's actually realised that whether it likes it or not, its place in reducing reoffending is that it's a catalyst for reintegration. And
Yep.
I don't think housing realised that it had that role, and I don't think that we need to keep promoting that. We need to keep promoting the idea that housing is a catalyst for effective reintegration, and
Okay,
that housing has a key role. And that's, for me, that's the everything else can fall into place after that.
Yeah,
right.
definitely.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, I'm looking forward to a review of the Shore Standards, seeing how effective that's been and see where we're at. I think two things: housing officers going into every prison, definitely like meeting with everyone kind of months before they're about to be released. And this thing that I mentioned previously about having a personal housing plan, personalised to that individual. So there is a set plan, so no one is released onto the streets of a city to be rough sleeping, but they've actually got something planned, whether it be temporary accommodation or permanent accommodation.
Thanks, Paul. SHORE stands for Sustainable Housing on Release for Everyone, is that correct?
Yes.
Right, this leads all very nicely on to another question from David and Ruth Martin in Prison Fellowship. Surely housing could be sorted by having the political will to give councils a statutory obligation to house prisoners for a few weeks after release. What are chances of that, Rob?
The councils already have the statutory obligation to assess homelessness. I think Paul's point about homeless demand is really important. We don't yet have a shared sense, I don't think, of what the reality is of homelessness on release. If you look at the homelessness stats, it would be about 6% of homeless applications are for people from prison. Our experience of where people, if you look at the prisoner survey, I think it's about 40% or something of people don't know where they're going to be going when they leave prison. If you were to, tally those different stats up, there's not a shared sense of demand, and I think that's something that we need to keep working towards as part of the SHORE review. Is that if we had a shared sense of demand between prisons and housing, we might be able to move that on a little bit more. There's an incredible amount of work going on across the country on this. I mean, some of the work on Housing First, for example, is fantastic. We've got data sharing arrangements in place now with every council, which is taking ages to put in place. But it means that councils now know 3 months before release when somebody is returning to their area. And that goes to housing authorities now. So it really, the building blocks are there to really make a difference in this. And I'm quite upbeat about it. And I'm pretty sure, you can hear the passion tonight about housing and the interest in housing, and a shared feeling that it's something that we really need to put an emphasis on.
I agree. Thank you very much. Here, a question from Elizabeth Lovick. The third sector does a fantastic job, but surely again much of their work should be done by statutory services. Then the third sector could concentrate on their strengths. Kevin, what do you think about that?
Can you repeat that question, please?
The third sector does a fantastic job, but surely again much of their work should be done by statutory services. Then the third sector could concentrate on their strengths.
Yeah, but I think again it's about relationships with the statutory services as well. You know what I mean? It's about getting that connection. Our job is to get people to go to the statutory services and engage. Our job is to help people. We're talking about housing and homelessness. Some people find it difficult living in a home. Are their needs going to be met? Have they got furniture? There's a lot of these things that we got to put in place. Statutory services don't cover that. Do you know what I mean? We stay by their side. Aid and abet doesn't shop. We're there at 10 o'clock at night if need be. We're there on a Saturday and Sunday if need be. That's why it's important that the people, the lived experience in the criminal justice system, who have been homeless, who have been begging on the street, who have done sofa surfing. I should get an award for sofa surfing from my past. What I'm saying is, we've been there. We know how difficult it can be, and sometimes just being with somebody 10 at night when it starts. So statutory services don't provide that. We fill in the gaps, for all people with lived experience. And what Aid and Abet mentors do is they're there to support 24/7. Our phones are on 24/7. People can't phone a statutory service at 7 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, or they've got a voice machine in there. What they get is they get a human kindness voice for us guys. You know what I mean? So there's a big difference. But again, it's about how do we all work together on it, especially with housing, when we talk about housing and needs are met, and then is there housing availability? The councils provide the houses. I mean, this could go really, because I get quite annoyed and I've got to watch my language here, but with housing, they talk about everybody should be housed. But when people come into prison and going straight into hostels, and everybody that's in the hostel who still came to prison, they're all back in another prison, but in the community, probably a lot worse off from what they were when they were in prison. Because they've not got 3 meals a day, they've not got a TV, they've not got the health care, because all that's in prison. And then you wonder why so many people relapse within that 72 hours, not just relapsing back into substance use, relapse back into offending behaviour, relapse back into the way of living again. And so there's a lot to be covered in that sense.
Thanks, Kevin. Right, one more point here. All of this is good stuff, but what capacity is there in organisations in relation to geographical and numerical need across the country? Paul, what do you reckon?
Yep, so we're always looking for more volunteers, that's for sure. I think one of the advantages, the strengths that we have as being a Christian organisation, the biggest strength we have here on earth physically is churches in communities where maybe you don't have a community centre anymore. It's the one connecting place. Knowing that we generally have churches in a lot of communities still across Scotland, thankfully, we can take volunteers from those churches to then work as our mentors, which means that we do have a geographic spread. As far as there are churches, there is a potential for volunteers. Numerically, we can generally find people. I would probably say that we were keeping up with the level of referrals that we get from chaplaincy teams. Sometimes it can be that we get people released to areas and we actually don't have sufficient volunteers there, but generally there's a way of making it work. Thankfully, our mentors go the extra mile and would be prepared to travel across different local authorities to make it work.
Thank you very much for that. Here's another question which opening up a new field. This comes from Sarah Martin. What do you think is the difference to men and women prisoners? What's the difference between treatment of men and women prisoners? I guess that means. Kevin?
Yeah, you know what? Can you hear me all right, Pete? Yeah, okay. So, do you know what? Female, I don't think there's a difference in a sense that there's females are more needs. I feel females suffer more in society. I feel that when I talk about trauma, I feel that women also experience more trauma than men. I know that the jails are predominantly filled by males. However, and we've got a low number compared, but I think Scotland has a high in compared to percentages per population size. But asking is there a difference? Well, no, when it comes to the experiences of females who are going into the prison system, didn't choose to be a shoplifter or a drug addict or whatever. What happened in their lives led them to behave. They behaved in a way due to the way they were treated. I believe the difference is I feel that females suffer more pain than males, but I do believe males are more sensitive than females, and that's something that males don't talk about. But the thing is, I feel that there should be more support for females, because there's girls in prisons who have kids, there's girls in prison who could have had their kids removed from them due to behaviour, who could be reunited with their kids in the future if we had the proper recovery and the proper support and help for females. So yeah, I sway on the side that I feel that the needs are more needed for females. in that sense, you know, because you know, you don't get I'm not trying to stereotype. What I'm trying to say is you don't get a female drug dealing gang. You don't get a you know, a crowd of females are individually caught up in the system. They're not really caught up in gangs, and if they're caught up in gangs, they're caught in a male-dominated gang or exploited by a male-dominating gang. Do you know what I mean? So it's that. Again, I'm a wee bit passionate about that as well, because I feel that there should be more put in place. I feel that no female should ever leave prison and go into a hostel. Do you know what I mean? I don't. So there's a lot that gets me with that. So there's the differences there, you know. So yeah.
Okay, Rob, what do you reckon?
I remember going back to my community justice days, and I asked a couple of politicians to go to Cornton Vale. I'm not going to tell you what parties they were from, but there was a couple of politicians from my board went to Cornton Vale, and it made a huge impression on them, mainly because they were struck by the vulnerability of the population, and I think that really helped to educate the politicians about the needs of different populations. What you also find, and I think Justice Analytical Services highlighted this, is that the reintegration priorities of women are different, slightly different, mainly because they have responsibilities that men sometimes don't take or don't have. So there's a lot more of an emphasis on financial inclusion, for example, with women than what there may be with men. One of the things that really struck me when I came back to Scotland was I went to the visitor centre at Edinburgh, and I remember a huge hubbub, you know, loads of people waiting to go in and visit men, you know, trainers, you know, taking stuff in for their family. You don't get that really at Cornton Vale. Men don't visit in the same way as women do, was my experience when I was in the Community Justice Authority. I know that might sound I don't know whether you agree with it or not, but it was my experience that women tend to be more stigmatised, I think, by the people outside prison compared to maybe men. I don't know, but it was something that always stuck with me.
Okay, right. We've got another question here from Dan Gunn, who has spent some time working in the prison service, to say the least. And he's pleased to hear about the focus on housing, but this has been the case for some time. What is changing in reality? Are the building blocks making a difference in practice? Some housing associations refuse to take people with lived experience. Is this still the case? The speaker at the Families Outside conference today said 30% leaving prison are homeless. Is this a figure that you recognise, Rob?
I would go back to the point that Paul made earlier, and I was trying to get across. I don't know what the shared demand for homelessness looks like. The reason being, and I have, we have flagged it, homelessness applications are based on your situation at that particular time. So if you leave prison on a Friday or a Thursday or whatever day of the week it is, and you sofa surf for the weekend and you go in to the homeless at the housing office on a Monday, you're assessed based on you being on somebody's couch. You're not based on you having left prison. So the story, the backstory of imprisonment and the backstory of release from prison is not always understood or captured in the homelessness stats. So I think what we need is to be able to tell that story we're trying to tell that story, but I still think there are gaps in the data and the knowledge. If there's a debate at the moment about local connection, and whether local connection is something that should be removed. Those kind of that kind of debate opens up, if you like, the dialogue for discussion around the needs of people leaving custody and making sure that the reality of homelessness related to people leaving custody is better understood. From my point of view, I've been working for what seems like an eternity to try and get arrangements in place to deliver the shore standards. There's a huge amount of appetite in housing to respond to that. So I don't want housing and people in housing getting a hard time here. It's because there's a real willingness to step up to that. But we need better coordination, better data sharing, and better joint working between prisons and housing at local level.
Okay, Rob. I seem to recall that there's a process by which prisoners who might be released on a Friday can be released 1 or 2 days before the weekend.
Yes.
Reduce the risk of them spending a weekend skint and without medication or proper housing.
Correct.
So is that being used at all? From what you said just now, it sounds almost as if people would do better to be released on a Friday, spend a weekend on a sofa and present homeless on a Monday, rather than saying they've been in prison on a Thursday.
No, I was just, what I mean is that, the reality is if somebody's leaving custody and they go to a housing office, if the homelessness has not been prevented before release, then the likelihood is that they're going to go to a housing office, which isn't attractive to everybody when they leave custody. So they might go and stay with a pal or whatever. In terms of the flexible release, you're spot on. One of the challenges that we've had around flexible release, and we're just about to write to councils in the next week or two about the Christmas and New Year holidays as well, to promote the use of flexible release if that supports reintegration. But one of the challenges that we had was that councils didn't know who was returning to their area. So, or they didn't always know. So the only people really who were actively engaged in flexible release applications were the third sector, predominantly the public social partnerships. Now that the data sharing agreement's in place, now that the data arrangement's in place, and councils know when somebody's due for release, they now have that option. The alternative is, and a good case study would maybe be Shetland or something like that. What the flexible release arrangements actually did was improve other release arrangements. A good example would be if somebody's leaving Grampian, they're going back to Shetland. You would, if it was a Friday or whatever, that would have maybe have been a problem. You would have maybe missed the ferry, or you wouldn't get a flight or whatever. But now the arrangements are such that you've got the case management approach, and then somebody's going back to Shetland in a more managed way. So they're getting an earlier flight or an earlier ferry or whatever to make sure that they're accessing the housing services on release. That negates the need for flexible release, but the flexible release has led to a better release management process. So that's a key, I think. So I wouldn't dismiss flexible release. I think the data sharing should act as a further catalyst for its use. And we're coming up to Christmas and New Year, and I would expect some people to. We've got, I just did a look at the stats today, for example. I think there's something like 4 women who might be due for release on a public holiday over Christmas and New Year. So it's important that the councils and partners know about that, so that they can put the arrangements in place to get flexible release if they need it.
This sounds really good, Rob. It's only been on the go for 4 years. and the process.
Yeah,
And the
yeah,
process takes a while to get used to culturally, I think. And I think
yeah,
I'd like to see it introduced because it does make a big difference to folk. Because the folk are
yes,
released on a Friday, include those who send it to technically end up on a Saturday and Sunday. So it's a disproportionate number come out on a Friday compared to every other day of the week.
correct.
So can
Correct.
we move on slightly, please? Can those with addictions or serious mental health problems receive effective treatment in prison, or can this only be done outside on the release and in residential rehab programs? That's another one from Mark at Prison Fellowship Scotland. Kev, and then Paul.
Pete, I believe that the prison could play a part in preparing people. Residential rehab is basically people with addictions wanting recovery together. They're on the same building together. You know, mental health recovery can happen when you put people who suffer mental health together to support. They talk about the therapeutic value of one person supporting another with a common problem. So is there a space where, I mean, I would strongly, I mean, I know it's going to be, that will never happen, but, you know, why is there no residential rehabs within a prison? Do you know, why do they not have a unit within a prison where they take, and, you know, this guy's crime or this girl's crimes all being through addictions, and look at the trauma and then diverting them into a part of the prison where they can rehabilitate and then integrate back into the community again, or integrate, you know, a certain part of it to work towards going into maybe a rehab on the outside. But the whole thing about recovery is, it's the substance is just a plaster. It's just a solution to the real problem. Addiction is a behaviour as a result of what happened, and addiction is just a soothing the emotional pain of what happened to you as a child. You know, and I'll keep going back to that. But yeah, could prisons do more? Absolutely. Could do, but it has been to government. Going back to what Rob says, a lot of the stuff goes back to government on lots of things. Could they fund it? Could the prison run it? Could lived experience along with professionals and all that be employed, or not being employed, but be able to work within a unit within a prison where there is therapists. Every rehab, residential rehab you go to anywhere in the world, the therapists are former addicts. That's who they are. You know, along with healthcare doctors and nurses who are NHS workers. If you implemented that within a prison, a unit of 16 rooms where guys were taking responsibility. See, the definition he recovered is finding something that was lost. You know, and the part of that process of rehab is about finding yourself again without a substance, being able to cope with life on life's terms, being able to move on. So yeah, love to think in the future where we had prisons where, do you know what, you get a choice. Do you want to go into the system of prison life, which we've already got running, or do you want to walk to the left and rehabilitate and go into a residential programme, which is part of your jail sentence? The result of it is you could integrate like Castle Huntly and letting people out as part of their sentence and letting them out working in the community, volunteering, working in charity shops, doing that, integrating, working towards getting a home, living skills. You know, that is doable. Of course, I think it should happen, but it's been to government to make these things happen. So that is a long shot, but we'll put it out there.
Thanks, Kevin. Paul, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, yeah, we've got like recovery workers out in community. They've got lived experience. Love to have them in prisons. Big question there, just like Kevin said, who pays for that? If Connect Community already cost me £70,000 a year, I need to find that every year. Unfortunately, I don't have the stretch to do that, but would love to and think it's a great idea. Everyone needs to care about through care, and we need to do that in prison. We need to do that out of prison, and it's whether it's just a safety net or a springboard. Do we see prison as just being a safety net, keep people safe, or do we see it as a springboard to a transformed life?
That sounds good to me. Thank you very much. Right then, so what is needed more? More people, more third sector, more mentors, more volunteers to support, or more better use of modern technology and better use of data? Is it people or machines?
Relationships, partnerships, collaboration.
Okay. Rob?
Data is a catalyst, or it's not a replacement for relationships. It should support relationships.
Absolutely.
It should replace them.
Paul?
Yep. Shared ownership of through care. Yep. Partnership working, and for that to really be publicised out in community as well, for people to be accepting of people who have had offences, just like housing associations you mentioned, some of them do accept people who have had offences.
Right, one thing I'd like to do is practice kindness. I realise we've run a bit over time, and I'd like to thank you all very much indeed. Any last single sentence from each of you? A short one, please. Starting with you, Kev, a short sentence about, just to wrap up.
Just, you know what, it's not, I think that, you know, it's been great tonight, and just to say that, you know, we've all been going through a difficult time this year, you know, through what's been happening. I think we should always remember that kindness is, you know, always have that forward in life. I believe we'll come at the back end of this. I believe we've had an opportunity. I know it's a long sentence here, Pete, but we've created food for thought tonight. So I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be part of this tonight. So wish you all well. Thank you.
Thanks, Kev. Paul?
Great. I like what Sheila's written inside the comments, preventing people going to prison in the first place, but it's all about like also preventing homelessness. How do we do that? We do that in communities. We don't prevent homelessness in the prison as a first port of call, but we do it out in community. And so enriching and strengthening our communities is certainly a way forward to improving our society.
Okay, Rob, the last word to you in a short sentence, please.
I'm just really keen to hear what people think the role of prison should be in 21st century Scotland. I'm always wanting to hear that, and Kevin's come up with a really interesting idea tonight. I just wonder whether, you know, what our academic friends would make of that.
We have to watch out, Rob, because I understand there's football on telly just now, which might involve Scotland. So we can't go into this conversation any longer than just right now. So I really appreciate the way everyone's participated in this, and thanks to everyone who's attended, and to all of you who've asked questions. Hope you've feel as if had a useful response to everything that's been raised. Thank you all very much indeed. I think it's going to be an evaluation form of some sort going to everybody. So please feedback, and we'll live and learn. And thank you all very much, and good night.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Kev. Thanks, Paul. Bye.